All right, we are starting now into Genesis chapter 40. We've begun the Joseph story, which began back, what was it, chapter 37, I think it was, is where the Joseph story begins. And all of Genesis, it's almost like it's building to this moment, this last story that kind of brings it all together and hits on all the themes that have been set before us in the it's almost like an early fulfillment of the covenant promises that God has given to Abraham. And we see the mysterious ways of God in it. So uh, we're going to start in Genesis 40 today. But I want to do a little recap, and I'm going to put the screen so you can't see anything here for a second. And I want to ask you, without looking at your notes here, can you tell me the Joseph story up to this point? I'll stop you when we get to our point today. But we'll begin in the land of Canaan, and there's Jacob, and he has 12 sons. And how many wives does he have? Well,
two wives and two concubines, for lack of a better term.
yeah. However, at this point, he only has one wife and two concubines. Rachel has died, giving birth to Benjamin. And so he has got his 12 sons. And so we start there. And how would you begin the story of Jacob and Joseph and his brothers? So who wants to start us off here and tell a little bit of the story?
I'll take a crack at it.
That's great, Bob.
The Joseph is his father's favorite son, even though he's way down the line. What is he? I think he's 11th out of 12, and he shows it, and he's definitely walking with God, but it's not going over well with his brothers, even to the point where his father sends him out to check on them, and the first time he came back, he didn't really give them good reports, and by the sounds of it, they may have deserved not having good reports. And so they're off again with the sheep, and the father sends them out to check with them, and so most of them decide that they want to do away with him because they're just, there's that much evil in them. And first they were going to kill him, and then the oldest boy convinced them that, well, let's not kill him. So they put him in a well, a dry well or a cistern, and
who was the oldest son that said that to them, that told them to don't kill him?
I'm not good at pulling names out.
What was that, Rob?
Reuben.
Yeah, Reuben's the oldest. And if you remember, Reuben was, I think, perhaps trying to get back in the good graces of his father after he had slept with his father's concubine. Yeah, if you remember that. So anyway, so that's great. So they throw him in a pit there. Real quick, before we continue there, two questions. Why did Jacob love Joseph more than the others? And why did the brothers hate him so much? So if anybody else wants to take it from there a little bit here and answer those two questions. Why did Jacob love his son Joseph so much more than the others, and why did his brothers hate him?
Because of who his mother was.
It doesn't say that, though.
It says he was the son of his old age.
It was the son of his old age, it says. That's why there's an assumption that, yeah, Jacob, his wife is clearly Rachel's his favorite wife, but the reason given in the scripture is that he was the son of his old age. So Jacob was much older when he had Joseph, and Benjamin at that point, even though was still very young, and so he's doting on Joseph. And I've seen that where parents who, when they have like two sets of kids, one when they're young and one when they're much older, they tend to be more like grandparents to the kids and spoil them in some way. So there's a certain affection that he has for him. But there's a few reasons given for why the brothers hated Joseph.
Joseph was his favorite, so they despised Joseph because he was his favorite son.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with three reasons why, and that's one of them, that he's the favorite of the father. He gives him that coat of many colors, if you remember, which was a sign that he treats him like he's the oldest son. There's that.
Well-
What are a couple other reasons why?
Well, there was the dreams that he kept having and,
Yeah.
sharing them
And
with-
what were those dreams, Bob?
that, that he was, that the rest were bowing down to him. The
Yeah.
brothers were bowing down to him.
He had two dreams that seemed to that suggested that his brothers and his father would one day bow down to him, and they hated him all the more for his dreams. And the significance of the dreams, what's the significance of the dreams in the story of Joseph, in the book of Genesis, really?
Well, they're being used, this is how God has spoken to people. And so this is, the family isn't thinking that he's just making this up like, I want to make myself bigger than you. They're believing that this is dreams coming from God, and that that he's destined to be over them.
Yeah, Joseph is a prophet in the story. Remember, God says to his prophets, he reveals to them his word through visions and dreams, is how he speaks through his prophets. And so Joseph is presented to us as this prophetic figure. He's a prophet to them, and he's declaring to them not his own personal aspirations. He's simply declaring to them what is the word of God to them. It happens to be a word that favors him, but they despise the word of God. But the father, it's interesting, Jacob doesn't despise the word. He's confused by it, but if you remember, it says he took it to heart. He didn't reject it like the others did. And there's one more reason, which you kind of mentioned earlier, Bob, in your summary of the first part of the story, of why they really hated him. So he's the father's favorite. He has these dreams that seem to exalt, God seems to be on his side too, exalting him above his brothers. And then there's one other thing that was sort of mentioned earlier.
The fake.
He is a fink, right? You don't call him a fink. He's a righteous man. He's trying to protect his father's investments, and his brothers are behaving horribly and mischievously. And I mean, he's a good son. You know, he's invested. You can call him a little snitch if you want, but that's certainly how his brothers saw him. But he gives bad reports on his brothers because they're doing bad, and and especially when we see how treacherously they act after this, you're not shocked that they were probably terrible in the way that they handled the sheep and such. So we're not told what they did, just that it was a bad report. So he's a man loved by his father, hated by his brothers.
Yeah.
We left off. Who wants to pick it up from there? We left off with Joseph in the pit. Reuben, the oldest, they all wanted to kill him, and Reuben basically convinces them to just throw him in a pit, and he was hoping to come back later and bring him back safely.
Mhm.
But before he had a chance to do that, something happens. What happens at that point? Who wants to take it from there?
Well, there's some traders walking by, strolling by, and the brothers saw a chance to make a buck by
Yes.
selling into slavery. So
And whose idea was to sell him to slavery?
Judas, wasn't it?
It was Judah's idea. Judah's the one who sells his own brother for 20 pieces of silver. And who were those traders, by the way? They mentioned who they were.
Ishmaelites.
They were the Ishmaelites. They're descendants of Ishmael, who are traveling through to Egypt. They sell him. And when they bring him to Egypt, they then sell him to whom?
Potiphar.
Potiphar. Okay. Who's Pharaoh's official. So that's the first part. That was chapter 37. Chapter 38, we have a little interlude with Judah. And we have this horrible story of Judah. We're not going to get into the graphic details again of it. You can watch our last video if you want to hear the whole story. But where Judah, this is really Judah's conversion. So it's taking away from the story of Joseph, but it's a very important story because Judah is an important figure, and he will become a new man after this story. But the story, if you remember, begins with his marrying a Canaanite woman, basically becoming like the Canaanites. He turns aside from his brothers. He embraces the Canaanite culture. He marries this woman, has 3 sons by her, and then God decides to kill the oldest son because he was wicked, and then he kills the second son because he refused to perform his brotherly duties in giving a son to Tamar, his son's wife, and then Judah promises to give Tamar to his youngest son, but he never does. So that she ends up having to trick him by pretending to be a prostitute, and she gets pregnant. But the story ends. Judah is such a horrible person. He is wicked and arrogant and self-righteous. He's the one who sold his brother into slavery. He's the one who, not only that, but he's the one who was ready to burn his daughter-in-law for her treachery, for playing the prostitute, even though he was the one who got her pregnant. Just a wretched guy, but he's fully exposed. And if you remember how that story ends, he says those words regarding Tamar.
She's
that
more
really
righteous
shows-
than I am.
Yeah, that shows a humble heart finally. She's more righteous than I am, and he never touches her again. And he has 2 boys by her, one of whom will continue the line and will lead to the Messiah. It's a shocking story, but it's a great story because you see, have you ever read the Chronicles of Narnia?
Mhm.
Do you remember I think it was the second or third book, their cousin, remember it was Peter, Susan, Lucy, and Edward, right? And then later on, the second or third book, their cousin Eustace comes along. And Eustace is this absolutely horrible human being. He's spoiled and whiny and just wicked, right? And there's a certain point where he has this conversion where he is so greedy that he turns into a dragon and like this enslaved monster, and he is completely miserable and broken, and Aslan comes and just makes a new man out of him, and you see it, just a totally new person. This miserable guy becomes an absolute hero as the stories continue. And that's what's kind of Judah's stories like that. He just starts off just the worst. He's sort of a combination of the Pharisees and Judas in the Gospels. And then he's a new man, and he's going to be different. We're going to keep an eye on him. So then we left off with him in Potiphar's house. And what's the next part of the story for Joseph, which we covered last time? He's with Potiphar. And how's things going for him when he arrives?
Good. The Lord was with him.
Pretty good. Yeah, really good. The Lord's with him. So much so that Potiphar puts him in charge of what?
Everything.
Everything he had. All his possessions, he put him in charge of. And things are going great. Things are looking up for Joseph until what happens?
What if his wife decides she wants Joseph?
Joseph's
He'll have none of it.
handsome. Yeah. And he won't do it. He's a righteous man. He will not sin against God. And so, of course, what happens after that?
She makes him look like he put a move on her, and she goes and tells Potiphar, and Joseph ends up in jail.
Yeah. So she accuses him of trying to rape her, and Potiphar's furious. But the suggestion we kind of looked at last time was that he puts him in a prison that is not as harsh as some other places. So it may be that Potiphar knew that it was trumped up charges on him. But in any case, he gets sent there, and when he's in prison, how do things go when he arrives?
It just dawned on me quickly that we've talked all along how God uses less than honorable people to do his biddings. And this is again a case where he uses a less than honorable woman to put Joseph where he needs him to be.
Yeah. He moves all the pieces, doesn't he? Like I said before, he plays both sides of the board. God is not restricted in only using good people or people that believe. He uses the wicked and the righteous. He uses everything and moves this person. And notice the journey that Joseph's on, this up and down. I mean, it starts, he's doing great. He's the favorite. He's got the world on a string. Everything's going great. And then he gets betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery. But then he arrives in Potiphar's house and things are looking up now. I mean, God is with him. Things are going great until he is betrayed again by Potiphar's wife, who slanders him and accuses him, ends up in an even lower place than he was before, in prison. And that's where we left the story of life. But even in prison now, the
Everything
Lord
went
is
his
with
way.
him. And the prison guard starts showing him favoritism as well. So God just continues this constant theme of beloved of the Father, hated by the brothers. God is with me, the world hates me. And we talked about that in our men's group on going through 2 Peter, where Peter calls the Christians elect exiles. We are elect exiles. That is, we are chosen rejects. We're chosen by God, loved by him, but we're rejected by the world and hated by the world. Exactly as Christ is, so it is for us. And that's where we left off. So we're going to pick it up now in, last time we left off, he's in prison, but whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. So we're going to pick it up in Genesis 40. And I'm going to ask Jeff, if you wouldn't mind starting us off here, verses 1 to 4. So Genesis 41 to 4.
Sure. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody.
Okay. So now there's a interesting plot twist. There's some new characters introduced to our story. And who are these two?
The cupbearer and the baker.
Cupbearer and the baker. What's a cupbearer?
Isn't he the one that brings him like his wine, and it's like he's the one that hands him the stuff. He needs to really trust him that
Yeah.
what he's got is going to be not poisoned or.
Yeah, I think would a cupbearer be kind of like a butler, I'm thinking. Be sort
Yeah,
of like
the New King James actually says butler.
yeah, someone who would attend to his specifically, hold the cup for him, bring it. I'm not sure if he would. It might even maybe even taste the cup if the
Yeah.
or he would.
He would. That's what the commentary said, because poisoning the big cheese was very common back then.
Yeah, so he's like a very personal and trusted attendant.
Mhm.
Okay, that's the cupbearer, and then we have the baker,
The chief baker.
the chief baker. Okay, and so that person is not going to be attending as personally to Pharaoh as the cupbearer is, but he's obviously supplying his food, and but they do something. They commit an offense. We're not told what the offense is. Apparently, it doesn't matter. But they commit an offense against Pharaoh. But then what happens? So they get sent to prison, and are sent to prison. What happens next at that point? So they're sent to prison, and then what happens before we continue?
There's a
The
dream.
chief god puts them with under Joseph.
Yes. Joseph is appointed to be with them
Mhm.
by the captain of the guard. I'm curious about why that might be. And I don't know if anybody has any notes on that. But for whatever reason, captain of the guard decides to send Joseph to be with them in their quarters. Maybe it's because they're personal attendants of the Pharaoh, maybe they get special treatment there. Maybe it's a better living, given their high positions. Who knows the significance of the offense? They certainly wouldn't have been violent criminals. They would have been killed if they were. So whatever it is, maybe the baker just, didn't bake his cake properly. Maybe the cupbearer, spilled something on him. Who knows? But they do something to bother Pharaoh, but they're given probably better quarters, and perhaps the captain of the guard is showing some grace to Joseph and sending him to be with them. I don't know. Does anyone have any notes on that? Verse 4. Okay. All right. We're taking guesses here. We're not sure. But in any case, the point is, though, that Joseph's with them now, and that's going to be significant for our next scene here. So, Steph, would you read that for us, 5 to 8?
In one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me."
Okay. All right. So we have some dreams here. So both have dreams, and each with an interpretation. So there is now going to be, remember, what does Joseph say about dreams and interpretations?
Belong to God.
God,
Yeah. These dreams and interpretations belong to God. So these are not your typical dreams that we have just of our subconscious. Again, this is God sovereignly working, and they know they mean something. They know that these dreams is something divine, something supernatural is happening. They probably do not, they certainly wouldn't have any knowledge of the Lord and the one true God. But they have an understanding of the gods and speaking to them. So the dreams interpretations belong to God. How do they receive these dreams?
Well, they're disturbed by them.
Yeah. The two men are troubled and downcast, and by that. And why are they upset?
No one to interpret them.
Because there's no one to interpret the dreams. Okay. Joseph says, "Tell me the dreams." Again, Joseph he's a prophet. He's coming to them. He's gonna speak the word to them now. So let's take a look at the first dream here. Bob Thomas, you want to get that first dream for us, verses 9 to 15?
Sure. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream, there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, 'This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness of mentioning me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit.'"
This is interesting here. I just noticed something here. How does he describe his quarters, Joseph?
A pit.
He describes it as a pit, but he also describes it in verse 14
As a house.
as a house. So that's kind of interesting. So it might have been that the first, maybe they threw him in the pit, and when he moved him in with the cupbearer and the baker, maybe they were in a house that was like house arrest.
But if you in the section before that, when they were talking about putting the baker and the cupbearer into the prison, they said in Pharaoh's house.
They were in the house of the captain of the guard. He put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. Okay, yeah.
Hmm.
All right. So that's pretty good quarters for them. That really changes my perception of the story. Because you often think of Joseph as being in this dark prison and dungeon and pit the whole time, but apparently, maybe at first, but then he's moved in much better quarters with the cupbearer and the baker. So that's okay. That's little details here I have not picked up before.
So maybe that was it because when they said that the captain of the guard put him with the cupbearer and the baker, maybe that's when he came out of the pit per se and into better quarters.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. So when we left him off, he was sent to prison. Heard these words. And the king's prison were there with confined, and he was there in prison. So he's keeper of the prison. So there's a prison, and then there's the captain of the guard's house.
Mhm.
So he was in the prison, which certainly wouldn't have been a pleasant place. And then sometime after this, so he's been in that prison for some time. He has moved to this house where he's given, again, showing the favoritism of God toward him in the midst of this great trial. He gives him this comfort. So that's really interesting. So the cupbearer's dream, he describes his dream to Joseph, and what happens in the dream? Just not the interpretation, just the dream. What does he see?
There is a note, by the way, in the Reformation Study Bible on the pit. It says an exaggerated description reflecting the frustrated prisoner's point of view. Joseph's place of confinement with the king's prisoners is not excessively miserable. This is the same word that is used of the place Joseph's confinement at the hands of his brothers. So,
Yeah, the pit, the hole. That's kind of symbolic of that's been his thing. He gets thrown into pits. That seems to be his life, right? He does great and he gets thrown into a pit.
And I left it up to go.
Having done nothing wrong. And actually, he gets punished for doing the right thing. That's the thing. It's like his brothers punish him not because he did something wrong, but because he did what he's supposed to do as a faithful son. And that's why his father trusted him. And he gets rewarded by being thrown into a pit. He gets thrown into the pit because he refused to sleep with with Potiphar's wife. And he gets thrown into the pit. He gets punished for his righteous acts, which is really interesting. So this dream of the cupbearer, how does it begin?
Dreamed about a vine with 3 branches.
Okay, vine with 3 branches. Okay. And then what happens?
They were budding with blossoms and ripened into grapes and clusters.
The branches bud and blossom and ripen into grapes. Okay. And now he sees something else.
He's got Pharaoh's cup in his hand.
Pharaoh's cup in my hand. And what does he do with Pharaoh's cup?
Presses the
Right.
grapes.
Press the grapes into his cup and place them in his hand. That's the dream. Okay, so you can visualize it here. He sees a vine with 3 branches, and it buds and turns into grapes. Each branch has grapes. He sees he's got Pharaoh's cup in his hand, and he takes the grapes from those 3 branches and he presses them into the cup and he gives it to Pharaoh. Okay. Joseph's interpretation. What does it mean?
3 branches are 3 days.
3 branches are 3 days. Okay,
The restoration of his office.
yes, in 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you.
It's the John rule of three, isn't it?
You got it. Remember the third day? Talks about on the third day. What's the significance of the third day?
Jesus rises.
Resurrection.
We see the third day throughout
Mhm.
in the book of Genesis.
Mhm.
The resurrection, of course, happens on the third day. That's why it's part of our creed. We don't just believe that Jesus rose again. We say he rose again on the third day, and that apparently matters. Remember the significance of the third day. We covered this in creation, the creation story on the third day.
There appears to be some kind of life or restoration on the third day.
Yeah.
3 is
So
God's number.
3 is the divine Trinity. Yeah. So in the days, it goes like this. Day 1, the Lord declares or promises. Day 2, we wait. Day 3, the Lord fulfills.
Mhm.
So in creation story, day 1, let there be light. Makes this great declaration. Day 2, nothing really happens. It's just a separation of the waters above from the waters below. But it's day 3 that suddenly it's a double good day, we called it. The land appears and it's declared good, and then life appears for the first time in the trees and the fruits and everything. And then the creation story continues with another sets of 3 days of the creation of the sun, moon, and the stars, and then the fish and the birds. And the third day is another double good day, the second, third day. So we have that pattern. There was another thing that happened on the third day. If you remember in Genesis, we've covered. Remember what happened on the third day? It was the story of Abraham. Something happened on the third day. All right.
Was that the day when he brought his son up to be sacrificed?
Yes. The Lord tells him, take your son whom you love, and bring him to a mountain and that I'll show you, and offer him as a sacrifice to me. He gets that on the first day, and it says on the third day he arrives. And so it's like this pattern that we see there and that's the scene we see. The Lord declares his word first, and then we wait for it, and then he delivers. So there's your 3 in this here. So he will restore you to your job. And then Joseph makes a plea. Joseph's request.
Remember
Oh.
me.
Remember me when it is well with you.
Mhm.
And don't just think fondly of me when you're in Pharaoh's house. But what does remember me mean?
I will fulfill my promises.
Means get me out of here.
Yeah, which is get me out of here. Out of here. And he pleads his innocence again. I was stolen from out of the land of the Hebrews, and I've done nothing that they should put me into this pit. He maintains his righteousness and mistreatment for it. So that's his first part. Now we have a second dream here. Let's go to the baker. Let me just add a break here. All right, let's take dream number 2, and we leave off here. Bob, let's see Bob Fowler. You want to read that for us here? 16 to 19.
When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you.
Okay. So I don't think the baker was laughing there, Rob. So, all right. The chief baker's dream. What was his dream?
3 baskets of food on his head for
And-
Pharaoh, but the birds eat it.
All right, 3 cake baskets on my head. And all sorts of food for Pharaoh.
Mhm.
But what was happening?
Birds were eating it.
But the birds were eating out of the basket on my head. All right. Joseph's interpretation of this dream, not as cheery as the other one.
Just trying to picture the baker's face. He's probably thinking, I'm going to get a good deal, just like the cupbearer. Lay it on me, buddy. Lay it on me.
Oh, good news. The 3 baskets, like the other one, 3 baskets are 3 days. But in your case, what will happen in 3 days?
You're going to lose your head over this.
Pharaoh will lift up your head. So isn't it interesting? He says to the cupbearer, in 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you. Here he says, in 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of parallelism here. So your head, but not in a good way. So I guess that'd be, and he's going to hang you from a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. Like, yes, Steph.
It's like, we don't know what they did. And you wonder if it was together they had done something and one was just receiving like a worse punishment, or, like,
Yeah.
why the
Or
difference?
or did Pharaoh think it was both of them and came to believe that it was only one?
Hmm.
We have no idea at
Yeah.
all what they did. Was it the same kind of a crime? Were they in cahoots, or were they 2 separate incidents that they kind of came together? Was it something, were they really criminals in some way, or were they just, pharaohs don't necessarily, get angry only with evildoers. Sometimes it's just people who are just minding their own business. So, we just don't know. We have no idea why, but basically the birds will eat the flesh from you. All right. A couple of things about this. These are some interesting pictures, and we do see some other ones of there's a famous scene in that we read recently in our study on Fridays of the birds feasting on the flesh of people. Do you remember where that was from?
Is that when we were doing the Ezekiel study? Is that what you're saying?
No, it was actually doing the Revelation study.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. And in the Revelation study, and you can see it here in this story, there are 2 banquets in Revelation. There's the banquet, the wedding banquet of the Lamb, if you remember,
Yeah.
and his saved gather around. And then you have the other great banquet, which is the banquet of the birds, as they eat the flesh of all those who are slain by the Son of God in judgment. And so there's these two banquets, and it's interesting here. This story is a story of two banquets. The one in which a banquet of salvation, where the cupbearer is bringing the cup to Pharaoh and he's restored to his position, and he's drinking his cup again. He's at a banquet, he's at a feast, but he's in a good place. The other one is another banquet. It's the banquet of the birds, it's a banquet of judgment. So it's very interesting. You see the two parallels of salvation and judgment coming together in this word given to Joseph. The birds also in the scriptures represent things, and I'm not sure they can be the scavenging birds, but they're also there's a story that Jesus tells that has birds in it that are not necessarily good things. Remember the story of the parable of the sower? And
Oh, yeah, they eat the seed that fell along the side of the road.
Yeah, and who do the birds represent?
Satan.
Devil, yeah. And using, in a sense, in that scene, the devil is used as an agent of judgment against those who do not believe, who's like the hardened soil that on the path that the word cannot penetrate. And so he sends, in a sense, the evil one comes and just takes it away. And that's sort of their judgment upon them. So there's some interesting parallels in the story, but here we have two words of God, a word of salvation and a word of judgment. And we don't know, why one is favorable to the other. We're not exactly sure, but there you go. And so it's a birthday party. How about that? Let's pick it up from there. Let's see, Elizabeth, would you read the last paragraph 20 to 23?
Sure. On the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him.
Okay. On the third day, which is Pharaoh's birthday. Happy birthday, Pharaoh. So he makes a feast. So this is Pharaoh's feast for all his servants. And he decides, I don't know if there's any notes on that, of lifting up. He lifts up their heads. What does that mean? He lifted up their heads.
Says here, a Hebrew idiom, often meaning restore to honor or release. Here it may refer more particularly to a ritual audience with Pharaoh in which the servant is singled out for special attention. Note the pun in verse 19, where a slight variation in the Hebrew gives the meaning, lift off your head, perhaps a reference to execution by decapitation.
Yeah. Although, yeah, he lifts up their heads. Their heads. He gives, I think you're right, absolutely, singles them out. He gives them out, puts them on a platform, puts them on a stage so that all can see them, so that he has them come on up here, you two, come on up. And so the cupbearer and the baker come forward, and he brings them out of the house and brings them up. He decides, he restores cupbearer, and he hangs the baker, the chief cupbearer and chief baker. So we're not told what the offense was or why he decides to show favoritism to one or the other. But we are told this about it. There's
Joseph was right about his interpretations.
Yeah, this is the important part. Just as Joseph had interpreted. Joseph's a prophet. He understands. But what happens?
He's forgotten.
But Joseph is forgotten. You know how long he's forgotten?
2 years.
2 years.
You know,
That's
there's just this general theme that runs through scripture. It always seems there's two groups.
Yeah.
One group gets a good deal, one group doesn't get a good deal. Over and over
Yeah.
and over.
Yeah, there's grace and justice. There's grace and justice, and again, we're not told anything about, you know, why the chief cupbearer. Was there something special about him? We're not told. We have no idea. We know one receives some kind of grace, and the other receives some kind of justice. It's just as Joseph interpreted, but the main point of the story, as it concludes, is that Joseph is once again forgotten. So you have this continual pattern of like, he is doing great and betrayed by his own brothers. God's with him. He's doing great. Betrayed by Potiphar's wife and by Potiphar too, and sent into prison. He's doing great and he's doing a thing and he's betrayed again. That's a betrayal. That man forgot him and it's left him there to languish. And how can you forget that? He's the one who interpreted those things for you. He's the one who relieved your stress. He foretold that you knew exactly what happened. And we know he knows because he will remember it later on. And 2 years later, he'll remember. But for 2 years, once again, he is destined to be down there for 2 more years. And yet all part of God's sovereign plan, because if he had remembered him and brought him out, all right, he would have got his freedom. And maybe what would he have done?
Gone back home.
Probably gone back home if he felt like he could, or maybe settled in Egypt somewhere and start his own life and just be forgotten. And no one would, he'd just be kind of go off the grid. But it's like, no, this time's not right yet. You're going to be there for a couple more years. So
After 2 years, so then the third year comes. And on
Yeah.
the third year, it's like,
third year. That's right. It's just great stuff. So I think it's a good place to break it. We're going to get the next section here, which is when we get to Pharaoh's dream. We know that story, but we'll get to that next time. So any last comments so far on the Joseph story here? Some of the things we're learning about the way God works, his mysterious ways.
It's just incredible, you know, like these trials, just keeping faith, you know, being patient, continuing to love. It's like the everlasting message, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
And
My mentor's favorite quote was, "God has a plan, he's sticking to it."
Yeah.
No matter how much, you know, you can either accept it or you can bemoan it, but God is sticking to the plan. He's not going to change his mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And I know for me, it's like my disappointments do not hold a candle to anything you see in the scriptures here. But I mean, so many of the greatest things that God has given me have come through disappointments. And just a quick story, when I was in seminary this is 97, I'm entering my last semester of seminary, and I have really good friends. One of them, you know, Chris Underation, comes to church. He was my roommate, and I had a couple other guys, and there was going to be 5 of us who were going to move into a house together near the seminary. And I was looking forward to that. These are 5 buddies. We're all good friends. We're going to move into this house together in Hamilton and off campus, and it would have been great. And then the news comes down that the owner of the house says, "I don't want 5 guys living there. I just want 4, no more than 4." So I only had 1 semester left, so I'm the odd man out. I'm like, oh man. So basically I get booted and I have to go back to the dorms, you know, and live on campus. And I'm like, at first I was really sad and really frustrated by that. I was like, oh, I got to go back, you know, and I don't even know anybody on campus anymore. And, you know, I've been out on my own for the last couple of years. Like, why would I want to, oh, jeepers, but it's just 1 semester. So I guess I'll just suck it up. But it was because that semester was when Christine started working at Gordon Conwell. And if I hadn't been kicked out of that house, I wouldn't have met her. We would have never met.
Mhm.
I met her at a Christmas party, and then I was working in the cafeteria since I was on campus, and just like that was the greatest disappointment of my life right there. It was really nice. So
Cool.
God works ways. But it
You
was still,
notice, like, even in all of this with Joseph, they're hard lessons, but by him being in the places that he was, he learned the language and he learned the habits and the lifestyle of these people that he was eventually going to have to lead.
very true. Very
Mhm.
true. That's really insightful. You know, I mean, his connection with the Egyptian people is profound now, in Pharaoh's house. So God's just preparing him. He could have never. You're absolutely right, Bob, because he would, if he would have never been exalted to that highest place at the end of the story if he hadn't gone through all of these things. So it's really interesting. So it's just, trusting the Lord. And when we think about his story as obviously the story of Christ, as he comes in there, the beloved of the Father, betrayed by his brothers, slandered, and is punished for the sins of other people. That's the thing. Joseph is punished not for his own sins, but for the sins of others, the sins of his brothers, the sins of Potiphar's wife, even the sins of this cupbearer who forgets him. He is punished for their sins. And then he's exalted in due time on the third day, and given the highest place where he saves the world and saves even those who betrayed him. We'll get to that at the end. Sorry for any spoiler alerts here, but that's the great story. And that's the Christ story. And it's our story too. It's like right now, expect the same. We are like Joseph. We are strangers in a strange land. We are those who will be betrayed, who will be slandered, who will be forgotten. And yet, throughout the whole story, though no one else remembered him, God was with him every step of the way. The Lord made it succeed. The Lord was with him throughout every trial. And then one day when the Lord's timing is right, he will raise us up with him forever. So that's the great story of Joseph, and we'll continue more next time. So,
Well, thank
all
you.
right. So
Now,
let's,
Michael, when you say next time, you're leaving Monday for South Africa. So when is next time?
next time will be in July.
Okay.
It'll be a while. Yeah. I'm going to
Okay.
say goodbye